It's all for you. Yeah, yo. There whenever it matters, and even more when you feel like it doesn't. Protect you so you never feel like you wasn't. Know I'm right alongside you. Either that or I'm behind you, but always got you. End the discussion, nothing means more. First one to offer is shoulders for what you reach for. Thought I saw the eyes of the world until I seen yours. And know that I ain't see a better view yet. I'm with whatever, so don't ever you fret. Know that you covered, not a hurdle or a heartbreak. A change what a partake, cause none of them won't ever get comfortable in your walkway. My job is to aware you, fully loaded, prepare you for all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
My message to any dad, man, first off, know that, yeah, it is a hard job, but it's the greatest job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't change anything about it. Everything you're doing from here on out, if it didn't have purpose before, now it has purpose. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Just be a dad.
No kid and no community should be left behind simply based on their zip code. I'm tired of seeing kids in the parking lots of Wendy's and Chick-fil-A's and Burger King because they don't have access to wireless broadband and high-speed internet at home. And I want to change that. I'm running for Georgia Public Service Commission, a job you probably never heard of and may not think is important. I'm here to tell you that it is important, especially to fight climate change. The reason why I'm running for the Public Service Commission in the state of Georgia, your Public Service Commission, is because I believe in lower utility rates. In the state of Georgia, 18% of our paychecks go towards our utility bills, whereas nationally, about 5% of an individual's paycheck goes towards their utilities. Here's how we're going to change it. One, let's activate our historically black colleges and our community colleges around the state to build out a workforce of the future that reflects an industry that looks like the communities in which they come from. See, we don't have enough solar and we don't have enough wind and biofuels, and I believe that when we change the narrative, we can change the investment. Which is my second point, drawing more public and private dollars into the state of Georgia to activate and accelerate our clean energy industry. See, I believe in solar, but I also believe solar should be affordable. Most people in Georgia and around the country can't afford $10,000 to $15,000 to put a solar system on their homes. That's why I believe in community solar. With the devastation caused by hurricanes and other extreme weather caused by climate change, I believe we can work with our agricultural community, our farmers and our landowners to increase our capacity for solar farms as well as biofuels opportunities throughout the state of Georgia. Lastly, let's make sure that we're focusing on energy assistance programs for the low and moderate families that are struggling the most. What COVID-19 has shown us is there are many families that have still not recovered. And in my heart and in my mind as your next public service commissioner, when we drive those public and private investments to our state, and when we have compassion and empathy for unheard, underserved, and quite frankly left out communities, I believe that we can change this whole narrative. No kid and no community should be left behind simply based on their zip code. On November 3rd, we have an opportunity to change that. John F. Kennedy once said, an error does not become a mistake until we refuse to correct it. We can reverse the impact of climate change by voting all the way down the ballot in races like mine, the Public Service Commission in the state of Georgia. On November 3rd, remember the name, Daniel Blackman. And let's work and get over the finish line together.
How you doing? You look kind of crooked.
What's up, man?
I'm doing fine. How you doing, King? How you doing, sir? Thank you for jumping on with me. First, I want to salute you. I want to give you a TGIF, the gift and father salute to you and your dad, because I read your story about your dad, how your dad was awesome. Can you kind of talk about that? And then you being a father too.
Oh man. First of all, the opportunity to speak. I'm between hotels. I'm traveling, but the opportunity to speak, man, and to talk about strong Black fathers, man. I mean, it's beyond immeasurable. My father, who passed away in 2008, invested a tremendously large amount into me and into my family. Just from an integrity standpoint, man. I mean, my dad was an Army Ranger, so my dad was, what I'm saying, one of those tough skin. He didn't hate for you,
Rambo.
he loved you. Yeah, man. I mean, I had a real life Rambo in the house, man. But he taught me integrity. You know what I'm saying? He taught me about what it means to provide, what it means to be a man. And I think that we have a lot of dads in the world, but not a lot of fathers. And there's a quote that Frederick Douglass has that says it's better to raise strong boys than to repair broken men. And that's really what I learned more than anything. He really built a foundation that, would allow me to grow and be the man I am today. So, man, I appreciate you being able to let me shout him out. Rudolph Andrew Blackman was my dad's name. And yeah, man, I mean, it's a beautiful journey, man. I'm the father of 3 sons right now. So, paying it forward, man.
I feel you, brother, and I'm feeling the love. And then one of my favorite Native American quote was, is, it's not about being a good person. It's all about becoming an ancestor. And I think that's
Yeah,
important. That leads
yeah,
into fatherhood, and then also what you're doing now, running for Georgia Public Service Commission,
that's
which is
correct.
important because I'm a big advocate of STEM. I'm a huge fan of STEM. I think STEM and technology is important, especially to teach to the youth, because you got to understand how everything around us affects us when it comes to water, internet access, which our community kind of lacks that access to the internet, to a strong internet. And what you're running for is important because I know everybody's talking about the presidential election, which, is important, but the local level is, I think, the most important because that affects our everyday life. So for people who don't know what a public service commission does, can you kind of explain to people?
Yeah, man, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what you just said, which is we are so focused and caught up in presidential politics, which is important. When we were in grade school, we learned about the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government. But we fail to, stress the importance of down ballot elections, man. I mean, those city councilmen, those school board members, those commissioners that zone the communities in which you live. If you want to talk about gentrification, you can talk about the president all you want, but the county commission that draws the lines, the school board members that manage the budgets. I mean, these are areas that we have to really focus on. The Public Service Commission, what makes this such a critical position is it's not just about utility regulation. African American children get asthma 3 times the national average. We're seeing multiple rates of respiratory illness amongst our senior citizens, which is a direct result of the air in which we've breathed over the last, several decades. I mean, let's be honest, COVID-19 has hit our community so adversely because we are in a position as a community where we had so many pre-existing conditions over the last 30, 40 years due to environmental justice issues. So the Public Service Commission, just to be very clear, they regulate your public utilities. So when we're both sitting in homes and facilities with electricity, but
Yep.
somebody has to pay for those lights to be on, right? And so the Public Service Commission is responsible for setting your utility rates. And, let's be honest, man. I mean, a lot of people, outside their car payment and their mortgage or their rent is their utility bill. And
So true.
utility bills, man, could, for some of our brothers and sisters on government housing, man, if you may be paying $25, $30 of rent, but your utility bill may be $200, $300. And if you
Yeah.
miss a utility payment and you're under government housing, you run the risk of being evicted. So we have to have safeguards in place, and individuals like myself who understand the struggles and the opportunities within our community. And there are a lot of struggles and a lot of people that don't understand how these elections impact them at such a high rate. So I want to thank you again, man. Down the ballot elections are extremely critical, and we can't survive as a community if we're only voting for president, governor, and mayor. If we're not voting for city councilmen, if we're not voting for school board members, House representatives, and state senators, then, you know, our community will continue to suffer, and we have to do our part.
And to piggy off that too, I think that's important too, because when you look at, like, you know, how the criminal system is set up, you know, the judicial is just as important too, because the people that you elect put those people in power to, lay down the judicial law on people, and that affects us in a significant way too. So, like you were saying, alluded earlier, like the lower ballots is 10 times more important than, even though yes, whoever's president is important, but the local is just as important as well too.
And I'll add something about my position. You mentioned wireless broadband. Right now, we are struggling in our communities to keep up because a lot of our kids in low and moderate income families don't have access to high-speed internet, right?
Right.
In Georgia alone, 88% of our prison population reads at a third grade level, right?
Yeah.
88%. And you and I both know the school to prison pipeline is real. So if you know, let's go back to the 1980s, right? Like, the crack cocaine epidemic over-incarcerated and left our communities behind. What do you think is going to happen with the digital divide? What happens when our kids can't get online to do homework? What happens when they can't, research and learn? What happens when they can't keep up? If we don't have high-speed internet in the communities that have zip codes that reflect our populations, then we run the risk of being left behind. And I don't know about you, but that's not going to happen on my watch. You know what I'm saying? I can't watch our communities, which are already struggling, black male achievement, incarceration rates at the levels that they're at. I can't sit back and be idle while these things happen. Whether I'm running for office or I'm just being a dad, this is our community, and it's our responsibility to make sure that there are safeguards in place to protect the most vulnerable people.
Definitely. And then also, the more keynote I love from, your campaign is the importance of the HBCU. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah, so I'm a product of Clark Atlanta University. Family members, man, from Clark Atlanta to Spelman College to Hampton to Howard. I mean, I think we have to understand that if we're not recruiting from institutions that provide education to the best and the brightest in our communities, then what are we doing? Right? I mean, it's easy for us to talk about being privileged to be the first amongst our family to go to college or to graduate from prestigious universities like Spelman, Florida A&M, all these schools. But at the end of the day, man, what it comes down to is, what does the transition from school and prestige look like to going into corporate spaces and environments where we can actually change the narrative? So one of the areas that we focus on overwhelmingly is we have an ambitious plan to activate our historically black colleges and our community colleges for workforce development. And what I mean by that is, let's be honest, right? When you look at the most talented in our community, many times we go to school, we get the education, but then once we get it, we're kind of scattered, right? And then we go where we can find a job or who offers the best paycheck. Well, why not target these institutions, and why don't we go after our engineers? Why don't we go after our young men and women who are studying physics and then they're studying math, and why aren't we utilizing the best and brightest in our communities to fight climate change? In my opinion, I believe that when we recruit from these spaces, when we target these institutions, we, one, become partners. Number two, we're exposing our young men and women to career paths they may not have been familiar with. But three, we begin to put young men and women that look like you and I in positions in an energy sector that traditionally does not have leadership that's black and brown. And let's be real, man, because the policies of environmental justice issues, whether it's coal ash, it's cancer risk, it's the Flint water crisis, it's New Orleans being rebuilt, we too often have people that are not from our communities or our institutions making decisions on our behalf. So I want to change that narrative by recruiting people, not necessarily to replace the people that are there. I just want to make sure that there's equity in the energy sector. Why don't we have more black men and women, more Latino men and women that are in these positions as CEOs, as executives, as engineers, as project developers, as project managers? Why aren't we running these projects that have the most high impact on our communities? So that's why we've included an ambitious plan to activate and engage historically Black colleges. There's no way around that, and we have to do a better job.
And I totally agree with that. But also the key component too, I think kind of sometimes get lost in the conversation is I love the idea about the HBCU, but what about like the kids that's in high school, middle school? How do we make STEM fun and engaging to that generation?
Yeah.
So when they go to high school, maybe they want to go to HBCU, maybe they don't, but at least start that pipeline of the future CEOs before they hit college.
So that's something I've been investing into for a long time. The question I answered is in regards to my position and what I want to do to immediately activate a workforce to support the economy and to support the industry. But you're absolutely right. But here's the three barriers you have to what you're asking. Number one, that goes back to your first question about going down the ballot. If we don't have school board members that understand not just STEM, but I would say STEAM, right? We know about
Yes.
science, technology, engineering, and math, but I don't think we can leave out the art component. Right.
So
So to me, one, we have to have the school boards and the school superintendents and the school the education secretaries from a White House standpoint, right? Like we have to have at every level of government, we have to have the most comprehensive plan to reinvest into education that attracts more of our young men and women and more of the underserved communities into this area. So the three problems that I see, number one is accessibility. Number two is a willingness of elected officials and influencers to make sure that we're pivoting towards that direction. And number three, we need parents and individuals that watch your program and support you to become advocates. It's not enough for me and you to know about that. You and I have to lead the movement and knock on doors. Like I live in North Georgia, but in Atlanta, in Southwest Atlanta, where a lot of our communities are being left behind, people like me got to go knock on doors and get parents together, whether it's 5 parents or 50 parents, and say, look, this is where we're missing it. Like the other day, I gave a speech on autonomous driving, and I let people know that by the year 2027, self-driving vehicles will have depleted 3.5 million trucking jobs in the United States, right?
Yep.
You're talking about 6 years from now, trucking jobs are going to be gone. What happens to those 3.5 million people that are driving trucks that are not going to have those jobs? What happens to those people that are depending on their Uber and Lyft job right now to pay the bills and keep the lights on? Those jobs are going to be gone. Uber is already testing self-driving technology. By the way, a brother helped engineer the technology for self-driving vehicles. So if we're not talking about these issues, we're going to be left behind. So my solutions for K through 12, brother, is really simple. Number one, we have to start recruiting individuals to run for office, local and statewide, right? So we got to start going and educating brothers and sisters that come out of Howard, that come out of Spelman, that come out of NYU, that come out of wherever. We got to start recruiting them, educating them, and then running them for office. But then secondly, we have to go to the elected officials with an agenda. Plain and simple. You can argue about Trump all you want. You can argue about, anybody, man. We could argue to the paint dry. Look at what the brother did. We talked for years about getting Black men and women to be elected attorney general so that we can have a fair and just criminal justice system. And look at Daniel Cameron in Kentucky with what happened with Breonna Taylor. Everyone that looks like us don't have our interests. So we got to stop this mentality of just saying we want to elect people that look like us, and we got to start saying we're going to equip people and we're going to run the people that are willing to be fearless and consistent when it comes to our agendas, man. So that's what I'm about.
And I'm about that too. And I think we have that blueprint. Because if you go back to SNCC was that. If you think about that.
The
So
Black
if we can
Panther
kind of
SNCC, all of that. You're right.
So if we can harness that blueprint and put that in tech, I think the possibilities are endless.
Not only are they endless, man, but that goes to my point earlier about education, right? Like there was a time in our community where we could rely on the generation that came before. Like you think about it, right? In the 50s and the 60s, there was a generation that came up through the Jim Crow era, right?
Yeah.
They passed down their strategy, their stories, their work, their fights, their struggles. They passed it down. So what are Black people innate, right? From ancient Africa to now, we're storytellers, right? We're creators, we're inventors. We haven't passed down those stories. You talked about a Native American proverb earlier. There's a Native American proverb that says, we do not inherit the planet from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So in other words, to your point, brother, we have to begin to look at what SNCC did. You know, we got to look at what the SCLC did. We got to look at programs like Operation Breadbasket and the Poor People's Campaign that help to build, develop, and construct infrastructure that our communities could stand on. What we have done is we have gone away from that. And instead of us embracing the principles that worked, we're trying to basically overwhelmingly use social media. Two of my mentors who passed this year, Congressman John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian, during the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, I asked them, I said, what's different? I said, what's different about now versus when y'all marched with Dr. King? And they both said the same exact thing. They said the spirit. They said back in when we did this in the 60s, he said this march was about the spiritual transformation. And we had this information. We were young. You know, these guys were in their 20s at the time, 20s and 30s. He said we had this space of information and knowledge and insight that we wanted to use. And it allowed us to be able to have a principled movement regardless of what was going on. So I think we have to get back to the principles that help build and construct the institutions that have made our communities great.
And the last question
is
is
a long-winded answer, man.
No, I love it, man. But that's the one thing too. Before I'll let you go because I know you got a lot of things going on. But how do you take that and put that in a 3-minute sound bite? Because people don't take information or harness it longer, you know.
Yeah.
So how do you incorporate that into like a meme or a 3-minute video to get people engaged in it? Because people are not engaged in long dialogue like that, to be honest with you.
I'll tell you how to do it in 2 minutes, straight up. I mean, no, seriously, man, because this is my gift. You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand that none of what you see right now from me is me. You know, I'm a spiritual man. I believe that we are all given gifts and abilities to be able to transcend our communities. So here's what I would say in 2 minutes. There are two roads. You can pick which road you want to take. As an activist and a leader, that's the first road, or as a bystander, right? As a stakeholder. So as a bystander and stakeholder, I would say this: stop trying to think that it's the amount of social media people that follow us or our friends, and start with the 2 or 3 people in your circle. We got to make this contagious, right? So start with what you know. Like when I first got involved with politics, man, I didn't know nothing about climate change and, you know, the judicial system. All I knew was about access to voting. That's all I knew. Start off where you're strong and create your own soundbite, because when you get to the level that I'm on, you have to be able to take information and go into every room, whether it's into a room with elected officials, with CEOs, or with community stakeholders. I got to be able to transform myself in multiple spaces. That's not everybody's gift. So for 2 minutes, what I would say to people that are bystanders and that are stakeholders is I would say, look, here's what you do. You pick an issue that you're passionate about. If you're like, I remember one time this old lady told me, I said, what's the most important issue to you in your community? You know what this lady told me? 78 years old. She said sidewalks.
Wow.
She said sidewalks. And I said, why do you say sidewalks? She said, my grandbabies visit me 3 times a week, and my grandbabies don't have adequate sidewalks, and these cars speed down the road. That was it. And she basically her issue wasn't prostitution, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't mass incarceration, it was sidewalks. We gotta stop complicating simple stuff, right? So I would say to everybody watching, pick your one issue and don't try to be an expert. Just speak from here, from your heart, if you can see me, and speak from here, from your head and from your heart. Now to the leaders, I'm gonna check you real quick. To the leaders, I'm gonna say this to you, and I'm gonna be very serious about it. Our lack of being intentional and trying to compromise has caused our community to be in the position we're in. Trying to be passive, trying not to offend white people, trying not to offend people that don't live in our communities, that has caused us to have irreparable damage on an entire generation. And what I mean by that is I have 3 black boys. I don't have the liberty of telling them if you dress right, you won't be treated wrong. I have to go to them and I have to speak to them just like the Black Panther Party, just like, you know, the black church from 50, 60 years. We got to go and we got to tell our community the truth. The bottom line is this. Yes, you have to work harder. Yes, you have to do better. And yes, when you're in positions that can cause challenges to you, you have to be able to respond differently with them. And so here's the main thing I want to leave you with where it comes to leaders. We can't be in a position where we think that we're going to change the world in an instant. Donald Trump isn't our problem. He's a symptom of the problem. So let's stop making him, you know, the guy behind the curtain. The problem isn't all these individuals. The problem is our parenting, and the problem is our leadership. There's a whole lot of people, and I'll give you an example in Atlanta. Since Maynard Jackson, we've had a black mayor, black city council, black police chief, black everything. But the largest income inequality gap in the United States is in Atlanta. If we look at how we're parents to our children, and we look at how we're leadership to our communities, I think the narrative changes when we lead from our heart and from our head, and when we tell people the truth versus trying to make people comfortable in the most challenging times that we're in. So I don't think it takes a lot, man. I think it takes courage, man. My dad was a United States Army Ranger. When he made decisions, if it was the wrong one, it cost people their lives. When it was the right decision, it saved people's lives. We got to stop making decisions based on what makes people comfortable and happy, and we got to tell our people the truth. When we tell them the truth, they live, they survive, they thrive. So